Hey everybody, welcome again to Channel News. We've got Alex Lanstein. He's a chief evangelist at StrikeReady. And we're going to talk, we'll catch up on what's happening in cybersecurity and talk about what they're doing in the world of cyber. Alex, welcome, man. How are you?
Hey, doing great. How are you? Thanks for having
Hey,
me.
very, very good. So, I mean, in this world of cybersecurity, it's like we wonder if we even get time to sleep these days. It seems there is never a dull moment. Um, Recently, we saw the situation with CrowdStrike and what happened there. Maybe let's just start there. What happened, right? We kind of have the gist of it, but how is that impacting ripple effect, if you will, in the world of cyber?
Yeah, I think a little bit is maybe a little bit to be determined. Where obviously there was the outage last Friday, but I think how it's going to filter through terms of service agreements and sort of like N+1 type rollouts of how companies are going to handle patch management and updates. With some of the major vendors, not that CrowdStrike's not a major vendor, but if you look at patches from Microsoft or even on your home device, you might tell people, hey, somebody might ask you, oh, should I install the latest iPhone update? And a lot of security people say, you know what? Why don't you give it a week, right? Let everybody else experience the bugs. And I think a lot of enterprises have been doing that today for sort of mainstream operating system patches or even application patches. But this was kind of in theory a signature type patch. Now you don't call them signatures anymore. You call them behavioral analysis packages or content packages, but we're talking about signatures. So I think that there's going to be a forcing function here to adopt how enterprises actually roll out um, signatures for security, which is clearly necessary, right? One of the largest outages ever. You know, Obviously, ironically or unironically, I'm not sure if ironically is the right word, but today in the news we saw that Delta Airlines, who had obviously massive outages, is going to be suing CrowdStrike, and I'm certainly not a lawyer, and I don't want to give any sort of legal advice. I would assume that much of this is covered under the terms of service when you install software. But obviously, someone took the other side of that trade at Delta, so it'll be interesting to see how it plays out both sides of the aisle. You have Dave DeWalt on the board of Delta, previously running McAfee. Now, we'll see how it plays out in the courts. I'm certainly not an expert, but it'll be interesting from a cyber insurance perspective. It'll be interesting from a terms of service and what types of what you're willing to give away when you sign up with a provider, I think will be more codified at the end of this.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's like everything is unprecedented, right? I mean, we're living in a world where you wake up in the morning and you open the drape, you don't even know what you're going to get. Is it raining? Is it thunderstorm? Is it a tornado? Is it a flood? I mean, like we don't even know what's going on. So everything today is kind of different, and we need to test these boundaries, right? I think what we just learned is that something like updating and patching can create as much havoc, if not more, because it's so massively persuasive. It's everywhere, right? That it's something to sit back and go, wow, that's a lot of damage, right? And Alex, I think once there's damage, there's always some lawyer putting up their hands saying, yeah, I could probably get some money for that. So let's see how far they push it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think yes. So for sure, there was very real damage, and there will certainly be people who didn't experience real damage who are trying to make the best of it from a lawyerly perspective. Um, and yeah, I mean, this certainly could happen to anybody. Has happened to pretty much every vendor.
Yep.
When you're as successful as someone like CrowdStrike is, and you're deployed apparently on at least 8.5 million endpoints, it's significantly more than that. But when you take down 8.5 million, that is a difficult number. So yeah, with great success comes great responsibility.
We're monitoring it as quickly and as close as we can to see what the fallout is. And of course, it's another opportunity, right, for bad actors to jump on that wagon right away and creating umpteen different websites, and people who are contacting you are definitely not the CrowdStrike, people. It's, pretending to be type stuff. And who knows how many of that is going to drive, even worse case scenarios for people as they kind of like spam people and fool them into believing something else to end up with ransomware. I haven't really seen any of that happen yet in real time, but I don't know. It's still early days. Have you heard of anything like this happening where there was a consequence?
So I'll say yes and no. So we 100% saw real threat actors, some potentially Iranian, some crimeware, some jokers probably, leveraging the CrowdStrike outage to try to as a lure to get people to install malware, install backdoors, install wipers, things like that. And I maybe I'll take the other side of the trade in that there were so many people watching for anything CrowdStrike themed that like as soon as a file name hit VirusTotal or hit your email box, there were security analysts like, oh, they're probably trying to use CrowdStrike. Like I'm going to watch those attacks, with an eagle eye. So I'm pretty skeptical that there was any real damage by threat actors leveraging the CrowdStrike name to then go and attack other people. Although certainly people did attempt it. Which you see after any major news event. It could be COVID, it could be a flood, it could be a some sort of a celebrity leak of some sort. Certainly, that's just in the bag of tricks of every fraudster out there.
Yeah, we've been listening and we haven't heard any breakthrough yet. So it's a really great thing because we actually were able to figure out, when someone does stumble, right? We could put up a fence and sort of block the bad folks from kind of like leveraging it as an opportunity. Alex, before we go forward, I just want to get a bit of a background in you. I mean, who is Alex, and what's your journey? How did you get here, my friend?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been in cybersecurity, most of my life, like most folks. So my first job out of college happened to be with a little company called NetForts in 2007, which rebranded as FireEye. So I got to take that journey with FireEye for 15 years, going from, sort of no product, no revenue to, a really hot company and then seeing how things progressed after that. It's kind of interesting to see the industry shift, the product shift, the attack vector shift. So our main product was around detecting unknown vulnerabilities over on the network, on the wire. And that worked great in 2007 when SSL encryption was 5% or something of network traffic. But these days where SSL is 90%, network-based sensing is difficult when you're trying to do content inspection. So my progression at the company was anywhere from QA person to, my first job was in QA out of college. So, tell your kids. So I was in QA, and then I got into security research and writing essentially snort signatures and Yara signatures and helping write detection mechanisms. And then I got a little bit into the botnet takedown space. So understanding at that point, it was what was called direct to MX spam bots. So these were pieces of malware that would get installed on your endpoint, and your endpoint would be the thing actually sending spam. That doesn't really happen so much anymore. Just from like a IP reputation standpoint, more spam is sent through, compromised Gmail accounts and not just Gmail, but compromised webmail accounts than sort of the old model, but it still exists a little bit. But, so I had to run through the gamut of taking down, major spam botnets and being able to see like a meaningful decrease in worldwide spam, being able to see worldwide spam decrease by, 50% sometimes when you take down one of these spam bots. So that was a pretty fun time. And then I got more into the espionage world or the counter espionage world, detecting targeted threats from, nation state threat actors. And it was, pretty interesting at the beginning of my career where if you went to a company and said, oh, do you know that there are nation states trying to steal your intellectual property using cyber? They'd think you're insane. They'd think you're like
insane.
Like what are you talking about? And now if you go in and people would be like, yeah, of course I know that's true. Like, why is this even a bullet on your marketing slide? So it's kind of an interesting shift in perception of the threat actors. And obviously the numbers of threat actors have increased dramatically, but just the public recollection, it's been fun to be part of that industry where, there wasn't even a CISO when I started. And now, every company, the CISO reports to the CEO, if not the board. So it's been a fun shift.
Interesting. Well, you know what they call the new CISO acronym is like Chief Information Scapegoat Officer. Just want to throw it out there. So
Yeah, I mean, again, not a lawyer, but it's been interesting to see some of the lawsuits brought against the CISOs by name.
mm,
Um, you know, maybe are fair, maybe aren't fair, but that's a lot of liability to put on one person. When
as a
maybe
job.
that's a lot to sign up for. You're going to have CISO insurance now, like I mean, people have board insurance, right? You're
Yeah,
going to have CISO insurance, or we're going to have to take out policies
for sure.
if you work for.
Doctors got insurance. So yeah, we got to have those too. I mean, the world's going a little bit maybe not in the right direction. But hopefully all the different compliance regulations, which is a little bit late, to say the least, is going to catch up, and then we're going to normalize a little bit moving forward, where we don't put humans, in jail or prosecute them for doing the best of their jobs. Alex, sometimes as a CISO, right? You're making recommendations to the board, right? And then the board goes, nah, I think we could wait a little bit for that. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Because it does take money, it does take investment, et cetera, et cetera. And even from the MSP community, we have the same problem, right? Channel partners, make recommendations to their customers, and the customers go away. You know what? I think we're good. We haven't been hacked yet. We haven't been, breached yet. So, maybe we don't need to spend that money, right? So it's always this challenge of explaining risk and what's your tolerance from risk, right? And how do you say, well, maybe if we go down that path, we don't need to. Maybe the insurance picks it up, but then they don't put the whole gamut of the whole impact, right? The social net, impact of, screwing up, your customers, right? There's a lot more moving parts. What's your take on how cybersecurity is today, our position, right? In the minds of the end customers, maybe government, channel partners, experts implementing this. Well, are we getting to a sweet spot where we can all get along?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Obviously, the numbers of cybersecurity vendors and the marketing on the one hand is like extremely, I don't want to say aggressive, but I mean, if you're a CISO, you're getting cold called all the time. The conferences, the vendor space, the vendor halls, there's 1,000 vendors in there. But at the same time, it seems like people are getting hacked all the time. There's major data loss that happens all the time. And so, yeah, so if I'm a company, it was probably difficult to figure out what exactly I should be focusing on, especially if I'm maybe a slightly smaller company. So what I try to impress on people, and we do this through our channel partners, through our VARs, through our MSSP partners. If I'm an enterprise and I'm relying on outside experts, maybe I don't have my own internal experts that know exactly what I should care about based on my region, my vertical, my skill sets, my budgets. If I'm relying on outside experts, I at a minimum want to be able to read the news and have a takeaway based on major breaches that I'm reading about. So not a hot take, not like, oh, hey, CrowdStrike had this big outage. Like, aren't they the worst? Have a takeaway of, okay, if this incident happened to me, would I have the tools in place to detect it? And would my humans, when they see an alert from those tools, would they actually action it? So you could take any major breach you've read about. You could take the 23andMe breach, which was not a breach of 23andMe systems. This was credential stuffing. So threat actors find credentials on the dark web or from some breach, and then they test them against 23andMe, and it turns out, hey, a lot of people use the same credentials at one site that they did on another, and then they log in and they steal a whole bunch of data. So the takeaway isn't like, oh, 23andMe security was, they should have been forcing two-factor authentication. Like, yeah, sure, okay. The takeaway for me is if somebody came in with valid creds to my enterprise and they were logging into my public-facing infrastructure, would I be able to detect some threat actor doing cred stuffing against me so that I don't have that headline of, all the Ashkenazi Jews' DNA getting stolen that you had in this 23andMe breach, right? so I try to have a takeaway from every breach. And there's takeaways from every major breach. Obviously FireEye Mandiant was compromised by APT29, and I'm not specifically talking about that breach, but FireEye was hacked by the SVR, right? Russian SVR. And the takeaway from that, one takeaway is, okay, yes, that breach happened via a backdoor in SolarWinds software. That's pretty difficult to detect, right? Over 10,000 organizations got compromised, and FireEye was the only one to detect it. So maybe that's not a realistic thing for an enterprise to detect. But what was the real trigger for the detection? And the real trigger was a user who had a phone and they added a second phone to their account. Now, how often does that happen? And how easy is that to detect for enterprises? Pretty easy if you're watching, right? Okay, you're an iPhone user, and then you get a second phone and it's an Android emulator. And again, let's pretend like that didn't happen there. But in the case where you have an iPhone and the same user adds an Android, that's pretty weird. Like, how often does that happen? So for every breach I look at, I try to help customers understand a takeaway of like, what could you actually do that's realistic, that's priced reasonably, that isn't going to have massive false positives, that you could detect what happened to these other people.
It's a smart way, Alex, and well articulated. I think the challenge in this world, man, we've got these bad actors, right? That's literally, I could say they have a ton of money, a lot of resources, and they got a lot of time in their hands. They could just be focused on this 24/7. What's the one way I can trick the system or the humans in this particular case, right, to get around these things? And when you have that much brain power, right, and they're not dumb people, not all of them, right? I mean, that brain power looking at things, they're bound to find another way, right? And the challenge is like, how do you anticipate all these anomalies that could potentially happen? And correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, but I think a lot of these big state actors type folks are no longer keeping the secret for themselves. When they get in, they kind of share it, with the other folks, so they can create a bit more, more havoc, if you will, in the economy and so on. So it's not like one person finds a way to get in, and then that's the only person that gets in. All of a sudden, now the information disseminated, and then now many people can leverage the same technology. What do you think of all that?
Yeah, so I guess maybe I'll kind of like rephrase it a little bit. Like there's not a ton of examples of state actors compromising an enterprise and then selling it to criminal actors.
Okay.
There are state actors who are stealing your intellectual property, and then at night they're using those same resources to steal like video game tokens. Like there's a bunch of Chinese threat actors in particular. They hack you to steal your IP. And they also hack you to like make their game characters a lot more powerful, or to like level up their friends on this game. Like, so that's real. There's also, it's very real that criminal actors are, breaching as many organizations as they can, oftentimes in a totally scattershot way, that they're not targeting your organization in particular. Maybe there's a new vulnerability in Fortinet firewalls, or in VPN concentrators, or in VMware, or in Mobile Iron, Avanti devices, or any of these edge devices. And they scan the internet and they find 1,000 victims. And then they advertise on the dark web, hey, I have access to these 1,000 victims. Would anybody like to buy them? Or they distribute malware through a broadly distributed spam campaign, and they programmatically extract all the cookies in your browser. And they go on the dark web and say, hey, I have all these machines. There's 1,000 machines, and here are the cookies from each machine. Would you like to buy access to this for $5? So that model definitely happens. And state actors who care about maybe a layer of abstraction between the initial compromise and how they got in may purchase those. It's still fairly rare, but not never rare. But what we see all the time is one criminal gets in, they sell to another criminal, typically for ransomware. And that happens all the time. And they advertise very openly on the dark web. sometimes the forums where they advertise are password protected, or sometimes you need a fake persona to get in, and sometimes that's real. But a lot of times these are public forums. You can go on breach forums or what the forum of the day. They get taken down every month. Very often you could go on. There's 10, 12, 15 big ones, and you could catalog these every day, and understand who's getting breached. One of the takeaways that I like to tell people is that you don't want to be the last one to know you're breached. Very often the organizations we work with, it's from access on the dark web that's been resold from one actor to another. And these things are publicly available. And oftentimes you can really kind of protect yourself by using a service that monitors these. Because like I said, in a big, obviously, you don't want to talk like overarching terms, but a meaningful percentage of breaches are these criminals selling access to machines. And if you are tracking these advertisements, you can look at the machine and figure out like who it is. Like, oh, they log into this website and this website and this website. And by looking at that, if I'm an administrator, I can tell like, oh, that is Bob or Mary Jane or whomever. So there's a lot you can gain just by paying attention.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people kind of like they've heard the dark web by now. They kind of like swim a little bit in it. They know they can use, Tor browsers and stuff to, move around. And we all know dark web is more than just for selling, credentials and so on. So people sort of get the understanding. But do you have any sense of how many companies out there are actually monitoring the dark web for themselves or their clients?
So most people are using some sort of a vendor, like a Flashpoint or a Recorded Future or a Cyber6 or something like that. There's certainly some vendors. Mandiant has some eyesight. There's lots of great vendors that monitor the dark web for you. And I think that up until recently, there's kind of been not a so what, but if you ask a company a few years ago, hey, would you like to know what people are saying about you on the dark web? The companies are going to say like, oh yeah, I would think I'd like to pay for that subscription. And a lot of times they get these reports about, okay, people are talking about us on the dark web. And sometimes it's actionable. Like, oh, they're going to organize a DDoS against us because of a position we took on a social policy or something. Or they're gonna try to rile people up and get like a physical protest at one of my stores. Maybe you could find that on the dark web. But honestly, like the most practical, easiest to kind of get your head around thing that I've seen that companies are starting to do is to monitor for all the leak credentials for your organization and test them. So you could go on the dark web today and any organization you pick pretty much will have make up some number, tens of thousands of plain text usernames and passwords that have been stolen over the last 15 years. And the problem is that many of those 90% of the usernames and passwords that are available on the dark web don't work. They don't work because like the account doesn't exist anymore. Maybe the person left, or they've changed their password, or there's some sort of mechanism, or the person who was compromised by malware was just like hitting a keyboard and they didn't really fill out the phishing form or something. So the thing that is extremely useful, and specifically in relation to the recent Snowflake breach, which was again not a breach of Snowflake, but of the Snowflake products. These usernames and passwords are available on the dark web. So why don't you have a program that harvests them and then test them against all the devices in your organization to understand like, okay, here's what the bad actors have really, really easy access to. Let's just see if any of this stuff is real. So that's like not a hot take. That's a takeaway of
Makes sense.
the Snowflake breach, right? And in the case of Snowflake, these were typically, again, there's 130 corporations, maybe they were taken. So not saying for 100% of them, but for many of them, these were local accounts, maybe perhaps not domain managed accounts. So it's not just, okay, let me get these credentials from the dark web and test them to see which ones are real, because most of them aren't.
Mm.
But let's test them against all your devices so that if there are local accounts that aren't domain managed by your password policies, like rotation or complexity or whatever, or two-factor, let's make sure we test them against third-party devices to answer that question. Because, if you look at the list of victims, many of these were high-class organizations with nearly infinite budgets.
Mm.
So if it can happen to them, it can happen to you, and it's solvable. You can get your hands around this problem.
No doubt. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's quantifying it, right? Like how crazy, what's the real risk there? If they've got old passwords, and great, congratulations. But if depends on how sensitive they are, or how deep access they can get. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and there's so those folks are like kind of scattershot, like, oh, let me just see where this works against the world. Like, and again, I wasn't involved in the breach response, so I hate when people talk about specifics about breaches, but how I would imagine this thing would happen is they look at the cookies, because like I talked about, they advertise these machines for sale. You can look at the machine, the name of the host on the machine, the name of the host in the cookie on the machine. And it's like, oh, this machine is logged into Workday. This one is logged into a domain that has Snowflake in it. This one has been with Databricks. Name your company. So you could just search and say like, oh, okay, I want to look at any machine that has access to a domain that contains Snowflake, and maybe that's interesting. But yeah. Anyway, so
yeah. But look, from the the bad actor perspective, is just kind of getting a little bit easier, for them to kind of like figure out, what's going on there, to figure out how to get into there. Just let's talk a bit about this internal source thing. So I mean, people are apparently gaining some access to internal source code, and you had some examples. How did that happen, and why is that important?
Internal.
So for example, the Intel broker.
Right. Sure. Yeah. So I mean, Intel broker was this was the Snowflake case, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this was just specifically, and again, we weren't involved in the breach response, but like this was, hey, I had picked the target, and the target in this case was Snowflake instances.
Yeah.
Specifically went and looked at machines that had access to domains that mimicked Snowflake domains, and then just tried to log into them. And we've seen this with like a variety of other types of data in the past. So this wasn't unique in a particular like quality of threat actor, or in the the complexity, or anything like that. If anything, it was just it was a threat actor understood, hey, there are a bunch of these instances, and I bet they found one by accident. There are a bunch of these instances, and they just try to run the same play again. So, oh, I wonder how many of these things I could access. So yeah, so it's not so much about source code leak. It's like the ease of going from like testing an idea of, oh, I wonder, oh, it turns out Snowflake doesn't force two-factor authentication, although I think they probably do now. Let me see how many of these other people are vulnerable, and you can spin that around in like a matter of minutes with these online credential sharing websites. So I mean, that's the big takeaway. It's, I mean, obviously the takeaway is, hey, you should enable two-factor on all your devices, even if they're not centrally managed by IT. But just the speed that someone can take an idea and turn it around to attack other related organizations. So maybe that's true in this vulnerability in Snowflake, but it's similarly true for all these edge devices that are getting compromised lately. Like, oh, hey, there's some new vulnerability in name your edge device, right? Your Barracuda spam firewall, your spam filter. They can go from that, scan the internet in a matter of hours, and be compromising organizations in a matter of a day. So just the speed of what they call the end days, like this exploit came out, let me get global visibility into this threat through maybe public facing services or maybe through my own scanners, so they can just turn around and weaponize these before you have a chance to patch. So again, so if there were like a takeaway here, it would be around understanding what your visibility is on your edge devices. Most edge devices don't have the ability to install something like an EDR tool, like an endpoint detection response tool. Again, I don't want to, but vendor XYZ who makes firewalls, you can't install your CrowdStrike agent on their firewall, right? You can't install your SentinelOne or your something. So you have to understand, like, this is the big threat factor right now, right? Edge devices. So what is my strategy for getting visibility into devices coming in from, going to and coming from the management interface on my edge devices? If it's not going to be from the device itself, which you can't really trust that to give you accurate logs, maybe in some cases you can. Like, what is your strategy going to be, knowing that this is the big vector? So again, that's always the thing.
Yeah.
Come up with a takeaway
Yeah. It's quite interesting. I mean, it's sometimes you look at this and you go, man, it's just a lot of stuff to ingest and digest and figure out what's going on. But it's the cat and mouse game is real, isn't it? So to wrapping this up, how does StrikeReady jump in there and sort of save the day? Like, what do you guys bring to the table that's going to help put a little bit of sanity into this madness?
Yeah, I mean, so we give you a holistic view of your of any alerts that are getting generated from your tools. We help you correlate alert data across different types of tools and normalize it so that you can see it from an identity perspective. So you can understand all the alerts that are related to you, Julian, as opposed to this endpoint or like this IP address or something like that. We allow you to do enrichment across tools like vulnerability scanners or tools like threat intelligence feeds, so that you understand, like, okay, we have this scanner, it's identified this device, and then all of a sudden people are talking about vulnerabilities on this device. Like, let's check the patch level. And that, you wouldn't think that that is a technologically difficult thing, but many devices on your network that are getting compromised are not necessarily centrally managed by some sort of patch management type tool. That's just kind of the nature of the way they work. So StrikeReady, we do alert correlation. We're a threat intelligence platform that ingests threat intel and vulnerability intelligence. We also monitor the dark web for you. So we talked about that credential monitoring. So we can monitor the dark web for your domain, for your IP space, for your, for your assets. If you're a card issuer, we can tell you when your cards are getting leaked in the dark web. So we can help you answer those very direct questions. And then for every notable breach that happens, obviously we're not in the breach response business, but where we can get access to what the actual attacks were, we help you simulate them in your environment. So it's not just like, oh, I read about this piece of malware or something, but we'll take that piece of malware and we'll help you run it in your environment, running your antivirus or EDR or whatever the tool is, so that the problem is when you read about something high profile in the news and then you go ask all your security vendors and you say, oh, hey, I read about this thing, do you protect me? Pretty much every vendor just says, like, yeah, of course, yeah, you're good, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
But what that means is oftentimes a combination of, well, if you had our tool deployed in a certain place or in a certain way, or your analysts were looking at a certain class of events. So one of the big things that we help you do that people really like is we will simulate threats by running the actual threat in a controlled environment, running your actual tools, so that you can see, like, oh, here's the alert that my tool generated. And what would my SOC have done had they seen this actual alert?
Wow.
So, maybe the alert is informational or low severity, or maybe it was high severity or critical or something, and the SOC would have noticed. But this allows you just to know that, like, hey, there's 50 threat reports that come out every night. Let's see if we can programmatically run those in our environment and figure out, figure out what our analysts would have done if they saw them.
Wow. Quite interesting, man. It's been what a great teaching tool. Because I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, we don't know what we don't know, right? And how do we know what the impact of something is going to be? We can guess at it, but if we're able to run a simulation, right, then we can kind of know. I mean, it's like for me, it sounds like war games. What if? Like, are we able to defend ourselves if this happened, right?
Yeah. There's a lot of great companies out there that do kind of similar things. There's like red team companies, and these are like, hey, I've got really smart people, and let's see if really smart people can break into your network. And this is not that. This is like answering a very discrete question.
Yeah.
If this happened to me, what would my tools say? So
absolutely. Makes a lot of sense, man. Great insights. Thank you very much for sharing all that stuff with us. I leave you with the last word, Alex. What do you want everybody to know about your company, StrikeReady, or any parting words for us to give us mere mortals some advice on, on tackling cyber every day?
Sure. If there were one takeaway, the one thing that enterprises want to be able to do and is solvable, and we didn't really talk too much about it, but there's lots of threat intel that comes out every night. There's free stuff, there's paid stuff. You have access to it, though. People send you things. In your SOC, within a few minutes, you should be able to answer 3 questions about a threat intelligence report. You should be able to answer, did I see this stuff and I blocked it? Because SOCs block lots of things. And 99% of the things that they block, they don't really know what they are because they're brand new and they don't have a threat actor tied to them. So given a threat report, did I block this stuff? And because I just did a great job with my policies. Did I miss this stuff? And it's currently inside my network. And if I got hit by this, what would my tools say? So those are things that are, the first 2 you could solve without StrikeReady, and the third one, there's lots of great vendors out there. But that's what I consider success when you're triaging a threat intel report. So you should be able to do it within a few minutes. If you can't do it within a few minutes, give us a call. We'll help you out.
Well, Alex, now that you said that, I mean, in my head, and I was thinking, if I was a SOC, right, I would definitely want to know those 3 things every single day, because either one of those things coming up negative means that I've got a problem. I would assume, right? And if you're able to check off those 3 things on a daily basis, certainly for the threats that's known, right? Then basically I could say, you know what, I'm good. I'm good as I'm gonna get today, right? But at least you're better than the folks that saying, man, I'm still trying to check off question number 1.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you mentioned, you're good on the threats that are known, and that's kind of where we start. We start with like, all right, let's take care of the known stuff. Like, let's see how you feel about that before you go into all this, intensive hunting and like the Apex SOC type stuff. And we can help you with that too. But a lot of people want to know, like, how do I know if I'm in good shape? Like, okay, here's the minimum of what you should be able to do.
Absolutely. Makes a lot of sense, man. And then you can get your red teams if you really want to know, you want to push the envelope. But great insights. Website address for people to learn more is what?
It's StrikeReady.com. STRIKE ready.com. StrikeReady.
There you go. Check it out, folks. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that you all need. I mean, look, it takes a village, right, to really solve this problem. And what's amazing is how all the, the moving parts come together, and there's always something that is missing somewhere, and organizations are trying to fill those gaps. And it looks like Alex, your team is doing just that. There are things that even SOCs, need help in figuring out, and that makes a lot of sense. And hey, man, don't go unless you check out the dark web. At least make sure your name is not highlighted to the top of the list. I'm just gonna say that as a parting message there. Thanks, Alex. Great. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you. Appreciate it.